For tip number 1, if you by any chance suck at keyboard and mouse, you can use a controller that comes with a lock-on system. However, you may be put at a disadvantage in certain situations due to having a limited field of vision once you're locked on to your opponent. And that's just one tip out of 100. Tip number 2, adjusting your camera sensitivity in the settings menu will help you rotate your camera faster and help you have a better sense of your surrounding, which will be beneficial to you when catching a Jujutsu Kaisen jumping in public lobbies. Tip number 3, test out every character so you can have a general understanding of everyone's moveset in the game. And having that knowledge of every character will allow you to have insight into exploiting certain combo strings, preventing certain techniques, and just knowing which playstyle fits you the best. Tip number 4, you want to have flawless gameplay. In other words, if you have a PC or have garbage internet, you want to prevent lag or choppy gameplay as much as possible. So a few solutions to solve this problem is either lowering your graphics settings, closing extra tabs that you shouldn't have open, setting your Roblox on high performance mode, or getting an FPS unlocker on your PC to smooth out your gameplay in general. Tip number 5. This is technically piggybacking off tip number 3, but once you have a general understanding of every character, I want you to pick a main and master them to the point till it feels like second nature. And if you still don't know what character to choose, then luckily for you, we will be covering all the moveset that this game has to offer. Tip number 6. As for the first moveset, the Honor Run, a great combo starter recommendation is with Time Fold Kick, which can chain all the other abilities once you initiate the first special move. But if you thought that was cool, you're in for a treat. Tip number 7. If you use R on your keyboard or left on the D-pad on your controller, you'll be able to teleport to your opponent, and you could also use this move as a follow-up to kick your opponent down if you use Lapse Blue. But wait, there's more. Tip number 8. Not only you could teleport with Gojo, but you could also teleport with Reversal Red on the ground or in the air as well. Tip number 9. If you're fighting a Hikari player, they will not be able to counter your Reversal Red if they're too far because of the second initial hit, so it's best to keep your distance. Tip number 10. Rapid punches can be used against someone who is blocking, and if you want to really get the jump on your opponent, make sure to teleport first, then activate rapid punches immediately afterwards. Tip number 11. In Gojo's base form moveset, you can trigger a black flash at the end of rapid punches if your opponent is close to dying, which is great for style points if you want to get disrespectful. Tip number 12. Now, I know I mentioned there are creative ways to teleport towards your opponent, but just know that each time you use it, it will use some of your awakening meter. In other words, you can't simply spam it 24/7. Tip number 13. This is another cool detail about the teleportation for Gojo's moveset. If you ever in a situation when someone is going to place a domain on you, you can teleport away if someone else is nearby. Tip number 14. Here's a bread and butter combo that you can use as Gojo without having to stress what move you have to start with and not that too complicated to execute. Tip number 15. While in Gojo's Awakening, you're able to trigger another black flash by pressing Reversal Red Max while holding R at the same time. You're also able to do this in the air or on the ground as well. However, if you don't properly connect the hit, then you will receive damage towards yourself. Tip number 16. If you see a domain on the field, you can one-shot it by using a Hollow Purple. Tip number 17. You can trigger a Hollow Purple nuke by hitting a Lapse Blue Max on an enemy that is close to death, then pressing Reversal Red Max to trigger the nuke. Now keep in mind, the closer you are to the nuke, the more damage you will inflict upon yourself. Tip number 18. If you activate Infinite Void, everyone who's trapped inside will also be unable to move while the domain is activated, so you're free to do whatever you please to inflict harm to anyone who's inside. Tip number 19. If you struggle popping domain in general because people keep interrupting it, make sure to do a down slam combo which should buy you enough time to trigger your domain. On to the next moveset. Tip number 20. This next moveset, Vessel, you're able to cancel each special move with a feint except Magi Kick. This is a great way to bait out your opponent and it doesn't make your special move go on cooldown. Tip number 21. Magi Kick is a way to counter your opponent, but it's also useful at the end of a combo if someone blocks your M1 string, since some players tend to mash right away because they believe you're left wide open. But if you thought Magi Kick was some ordinary counter, then you haven't seen anything yet. Tip number 22. Magi Kick has crazy range when activated and can pretty much counter every move in the game, such as Fuga, Black Flash, and more. Tip number 23. In order to trigger a Black Flash with Yuji's moveset, you must press Divergent Fist twice, but you must wait until your arm is glowing white in the back position, then press it again. To practice the timing of it, go in a private server and set the lobby with no cooldown, then you could consistently try to do Black Flash until you get it right. Tip number 24. You can use an air variant of Curse Strike and Crushing Blow. In addition to that, you can cancel the special move with a feint. But remember, you can't spam the feint though, since there's like a 4-second cooldown. Tip number 25. During Yuji's Awakening, he switches to Sukuna and his M1's range increases. Tip number 26. For Sukuna's special move, if you press R or left on the D-pad, you'll be able to dismantle your opponent by grabbing them, which does a significant amount of damage when executed correctly. Tip number 27. This goes to my people who goes against someone who's on the receiving end of a dismantle. As long as you continue to block, you will not die, but you will be holding on to their life with 1 HP. Tip number 28. Now to trigger a royal slash, you must press 1, then 3, then 2, and press R repeatedly, which does a significant amount of damage. For my controller players, you're going to press LB, RT, LT, and left on the D-pad, but you'll press a different input with a PlayStation controller. Tip number 29. World Cutting Slash can do a significant amount of damage to a domain, but it will not one-shot it compared to a Hollow Purple. Tip number 30. A quick way to trap someone into a Malevolent Shrine is by triggering Fuga and immediately activating your domain expansion afterwards, since your opponent won't have enough time to recover, to run away, or interrupt you. Tip number 31. It's best to activate your domain when your meter is almost done being completely drained at Sukuna, because you'll get a large portion of it back. Now it's time to move on to the next moveset. Tip number 32. While using Restless Gambler, if you use reserve balls from a close range, it will knock down your opponent. But if you use it at a medium range, it will stun your opponent for a brief moment. Tip number 33. Shutter Doors is a great way to start off a combo or to extend your combo for massive damage. Tip number 34. Rough Energy is more optimal at the end of a combo string in order to separate some distance between you and your opponent. It also can be used on a Dow enemy or while in the air as well. Tip number 35. Fever Breaker is also a great special move to start off a combo, but it also can be used as a combo extender if you turn the character around. Tip number 36. For a little bonus tip, you can use Fever Breaker after executing an uppercut on your opponent. Tip number 37. Hikari's special move is a counter move which can be activated by pressing R on your keyboard or left on the D-pad for your controller. This counter can also be used to counter special moves and even some ultimates. Tip number 38. And here's a bread and butter combo that you can use while playing in Hikari's base form. Tip number 39. Once you activate your domain as Hikari, your main goal while inside this domain is to get Jackpot, which is Hikari's awakening state. In order to achieve Jackpot, however, you must either use reserve balls or shutter doors. Keep in mind, it doesn't have to connect. Once that happens, a dummy will walk towards the bathroom or through the gate. Tip number 40. If you see the dummy go to the bathroom while inside Hikari's domain, it will boost your chances of getting Hikari's Jackpot quicker. Tip number 41. The longer it takes for you to activate Jackpot, the less time you'll have the awakening state, but the opposite will happen if you get it quickly. Tip number 42. While Jackpot is activated, you'll be damn near untouchable while in this awakening state, so this is the perfect time to, some people may call it, crashing out. Tip number 43. Energy Surge has overwhelming range, which is great to stop players who like to play passive or constantly like to keep a lot of distance between the two of you. Tip number 44. Here is a great way to combo with Hikari during his awakening state. Tip number 45. Here's a great way to chain with Hikari's special moves during his awakening state. Starting off with Overwhelming Luck, then Lucky Volley, then Lucky Rushdown, and lastly closing out with Energy Surge. Tip number 46. Pressing R on your keyboard or left on the D-pad speeds up your move while in Hikari's awakening state. Tip number 47. A great combo starter for the 10 Shadows moveset is Rapid Escape, where it prevents your opponent from going on offense and gives you time to open them up for a deadly combo. Tip number 48. Using Nue is the only move in Megumi's kit that allows him to break an enemy's guard. But if you want to be ready to start off your combo immediately, it's best to ride Nue by pressing R on your keyboard or left on the D-pad at the same time. Tip number 49. You can invade inside people's domain by riding Nue, but it's also much simpler to execute by using Megumi's domain. Tip number 50. Using Toad is a great way to decrease the distance between you and your opponent, especially when using moves such as Rapid Escape, which forces the enemy to be pushed back. Tip number 51. Now if you use Toad then Nue, you'll be able to throw the enemy into the air, then you'll be able to slam them onto the pavement. Tip number 52. You can use Divine Dog twice if you wait for the cooldown to be completely resetted, which allows you to dish out more hits back to back towards your opponent without having to wait. Tip number 53. Another cool fact about Divine Dog is that his attack range is pretty huge. This can be useful in situations if someone is trying to run away from you. Tip number 54. You can store objects while pressing R on the keyboard or left on the D-pad. Tip number 55. In Megumi's awakening state, you can use Great Serpent as an offensive move, but you can also use it as a transversal move to get yourself out of sticky situations. Tip number 56. Using Shadow Swarm can allow you or anyone else who desires to evade a domain alongside with you, which is a great tool to change the tide of battle when infiltrating someone's domain. Tip number 57. While summoning Mahoraga, you'll be granted iframes and phase through people's attacks or ultimates depending on the timing of it. Tip number 58. In order to play Mahoraga for an infinite amount of time, you must constantly hit someone in order to keep the meter from draining. However, if you lose all your HP, you will lose Mahoraga regardless if you don't have enough awakening meter. Tip number 59. If you press G on your keyboard and R afterwards, you'll gain access to parry pretty much any move or ultimate in the game as long as you time the parry correctly. Keep in mind, instead of attacking players while left clicking on your mouse, you'll be parrying instead. More moves will be implemented in Mahoraga's moveset at a later date. Now on to the last moveset. Tip number 60. In order to trigger a Black Flash's Mahito, you must press Focus Strike twice. But on the second initial hit, you must press it right before the character does the swing animation, similar to how Yuji does his Black Flash when the arm is cocked in the back position. Tip number 61. Soulfire has medium to close range when firing, so don't get the impression that shots have infinite range. Tip number 62. In order to scale up a wall, hold the spacebar and right click on your mouse while having your camera slanted to the right or left while climbing up a wall. Tip number 63. An easy way to insta-kill someone is standing next to a wall near outside the map and using a special move or simply punching an enemy till they fall to an endless pit. Tip number 64. When using Yuji's feint, you're able to boost his speed for a brief moment, which should give you a slight advantage over your opponent. Tip number 65. It's better to use the air variant special moves for Gojo's moveset in order to prevent players from completely interrupting your move. Tip number 66. If you by any chance hate Gojo players with a burning passion, Megumi's moveset is technically a hard counter because Megumi's base moveset pretty much interrupts every move regardless if Gojo's execute a special move on the ground or in the air. Tip number 67. If you plan on invading a player's domain in this game, it's best to only invade Hakari's domain since Sukuna's domain restrict your move with the constant slashes, while Gojo's domain stop your movement completely. Or, even worse, you may get stuck in Mahito's domain and get insta-kill in a matter of seconds. Tip number 68. Always play aggressive if you see your opponent about to trigger a domain, but only if the distance between y'all isn't huge. My reasoning for this is because depending on what domain it is, will be the result of life or death. Tip number 69. Never dash directly in front of your opponent because with experienced players in this game, they will tend to punish you by simply blocking and immediately demolish your health with a crazy ass wombo combo that will cause you to toss and turn in your chair. Tip number 70. Early access characters have instant cooldowns on all moves after activating Awakening due to the moveset being incomplete. Tip number 71. If you by any chance struggle to build your Awakening meter in public lobbies because you keep getting clapped up, I would recommend finding a dummy and meter farm until you're ready to hop back into the fight. Tip number 72. If you're in a situation where you're getting jumped, it's best to do some parkour on buildings in order to escape. Tip number 73. To win a domain clash, you have to pop your domain faster than the other player, and to know if you won that exchange is typically the player who's on top of the other player's cutscene when triggering that domain. Tip number 74. The less amount of people you inflict with a world cutting slash, the more damage that enemy receives, so it's best to use that technique on only one person instead of a group of people. Tip number 75. While playing as Sukuna, you can inflict even more damage to someone if that specific player has more health. Tip number 76. Aiming your camera slightly down on your opponent will increase the accuracy of Nue actually hitting the enemy. Tip number 77. You can switch back to your base moveset as Megumi by pressing G on your keyboard while in your awakening state, but every time you switch back and forth, it uses more of your awakening meter. Tip number 78. If you by any chance would like to unlock a new emote for free to style on your opponent, make sure to get the 50 kills by hopping into some public lobbies to rack those 50 kills faster. Tip number 79. You can stop Mahoraga for being summoned if you hit your opponent within the first 2 frames from being triggered. Tip number 80. This is for any of my upcoming content creators out there who wants to avoid copyright or anybody who's tired of hearing Gojo's piano theme song. If you go into the settings tab in the game, you'll be able to turn off the background OST for the game completely. Tip number 81. A quick passageway to the subway is near the grave site, and if you destroy the ground beneath you, you will fall right in. Tip number 82. If you want to jump scare someone with a domain expansion, a great way to do this is by waiting till you know someone is a floor above you and popping it afterwards. Tip number 83. You can use Megumi's shadow technique to climb up the ladder faster on the building. Tip number 84. With the brand new update, if you're in build mode while hosting a lobby, domains can no longer affect you. Tip number 85. If you want to get 50 kills easily to get a new emote for free, with the newest update, Mahito can now insta-kill players with his domain. So all you have to do is awakening farm the dummy and just rack them kills up in pubs. Tip number 86. You can now play close range or far range with the newest update as Mahoraga depending on your playstyle, which gives you yet another option to attack your opponent. Tip number 87. This is a follow-up from tip 85. If you're a controller player, you will have an easier time aiming the ground pitch move since you will have access to a lock-on system. Tip number 88. To avoid Mahoraga from gaining meter to stay alive, it's best to do mid-range or long-range attacks in order to give Mahoraga players a hard time to maintain their awakened state. Tip number 89. A great counter to a Hikari player who has Jackpot is Mahito, since he won't be able to survive in his domain from constantly regenerating. Tip number 90. With Mahito's special move, it gives him a different variant in terms of dishing out M1s, where one does more damage but slower to execute, while the other one makes it easier to perform by swinging M1s much faster. Tip number 91. Another way for building awakening meter back for Mahoraga is by pairing, and with the newest update that dropped, he'll gain even more awakening meter. Tip number 92. For all my Megami players out there, you can now rejoice because Yuji players can no longer counter Rabbit Escape, so you can bury him to the ground with no remorse. Tip number 93. If you see a Gojo player popping in hollow purple, it's best to get behind the player as fast as possible in order to not only avoid getting hit, but also to punish your opponent with a devastating combo. Tip number 94. Here's an optimal way to approach your opponent and do devastating combos instead of dashing towards them like a noob. Tip number 95. Hikari's Jackpot is the best technique in the game to survive while in Sukuna's domain without your health being completely depleted. Tip number 96. I almost forgot to say this earlier, but for those who don't know how to down slam, it's 3 M1s, then you jump and M1 again afterwards. Tip number 97. If you want to uppercut your opponent, just hold the spacebar while comboing your opponent or whatever the jump button is that's on your controller. Tip number 98. If you like playing casual matches and you wish you could see when your opponent finna pop a special move, the best bonding valve to use is called revealing one's hand, which allows you to see the special moves cooldowns and awakening meter as well. Tip number 99. If you see a player popping world cutting slash from a distance, some ways to counter is by using crushing blow, dashing behind the player's back, or simply running from it. Tip number 100. If you're tired of getting jumping and Jujutsu shenanigans, feel free to join my Discord and recruit some people to help you from getting jumped.